Scripture 101, Chapter 1, How the Bible Came to Be. The Bible is first of all a collection of books that were written at different times by different authors. The historical scope of the text covers almost 2,000 years. When it comes to who wrote the Bible, there is the Dictation Theory. Muslims believe that God dictated the Quran word by word to Muhammad. Mormons believe that God wrote the scriptures, the Book of Mormon, himself, and gave golden tablets to the prophet Joseph Smith. Many fundamentalist Christians subscribe to a form of the dictation theory that God personally ordained each word specifically. The video clip following will help put that into context. Then we will look at what the Catholic Church teaches about the authorship of Scripture, that collaboration between God and man. The stages in which Scripture develops. Stage 1 is the event stage. God has acted in human history, revealing himself. As we reflect upon that event, we are engaged in the process of theology that leads us to the creation of Scripture. At first, these reflections were passed on in oral form. The stories were told and retold. And for many centuries, this is how the tradition was kept alive. Later, after David is king in Jerusalem, and the environment is conducive, the writing down of some of these stories begins to take place. Events such as the dividing of the two kingdoms, later the exile, leads to some editing, telling the stories from a different perspective. Finally, the last stage is the collection of all of the written materials and the process of approving what is inspired and what isn't. There were many other religious writings, both during the Old Testament period and the New Testament period, that did not make the final cut. Some significant Old Testament dates. Our story really begins with Abraham, around 1850 before Christ. And this is where we begin to mark a sense of history. Things that happened prior to this are in the realm of prehistory, myth, legend. The Exodus was a major watershed. No longer do the Israelites see themselves as a family. Now they are a tribe, a collection of families, descendants of Israel, the 12 tribes. In the year 1000 BC, David becomes king, and Israel becomes a nation, and its self-identity changes, as does the situation of their life. No longer are they a pilgrim people wandering around in the desert. Things now center around Jerusalem and eventually the temple. When Solomon dies, the kingdom is divided. Israel in the north and Judah in the south around Jerusalem. Eventually, Israel is destroyed. Judah becomes the remaining kingdom. In 587 BC, the Babylonians take the Jewish leadership into exile in Babylon. And it is during this time especially, and what follows, that recalling the stories of their past become important. Recovering a sense of their identity, who they are, and what God has done for them. 330 BC begins the career of Alexander the Great, who conquered this area, and has an impact upon what scriptures now are preserved. A couple significant New Testament dates. St. Paul is the first New Testament author. He begins writing someplace around 48 AD and concludes shortly after 60 AD. St. Paul is martyred in Rome under Nero. The Gospels finally are written, beginning as early as 65, finishing up with the Gospel of John around 90. Also during this period, the Acts of the Apostles is written, a sequel to the Gospel of Luke. The book of Revelation is the last contribution, dated someplace between 90 and 100 AD. And this marks the end of a period considered formative for the New Testament